Having second chances in life mean that your story isn't just over yet. And in this video isn't about pretending mistakes don't matter. They definitely do. But it's usually about what happens next after that mistake. And the first thing I want everyone to understand is that making mistakes isn't some rare condition that only broken people experience. It's literally how our brains are designed and built to learn. And there's actually a study that shows that we retain information way better when we make errors and correct them for future reference. And it's actually called the hypercorrelation effect if you want to know specifically more about it. And basically, it shows that our brains, every human being that has a brain is basically designed to learn through trial and error. But the issue is that we live in a highlight reel culture, or with Instagram reels, Instagram, social media, all that stuff, where everyone else's life looks so perfect from the outside. So when we mess up ourselves, it feels like we're the only ones really struggling. But you're not. I'm not. None of us are. Perfection isn't just impossible. It's not even desirable. It's our mistakes and how we respond to them that make us human. And that shows character towards us. And there's something called a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. With a fixed mindset, we think our abilities and characters are set in stone. So when we fail, it feels like proof that we are like a failure towards ourselves, right? And with the growth mindset, we always see ourselves evolving to becoming better than we always were before. And this becomes like data points for learning, basically. And it doesn't become permanent that shows who we are, right? Because if we keep on evolving. So let's say, for example, write down in your notebook or write down something or think of something that you've made a mistake on it recently, right? And instead of thinking I failed at doing this, right? Like let's say I failed at doing my lifeguard test, right? Instead of saying that, say I'm learning that. Like let's say in my lifeguard test, I'm learning that I'm not good at treading. So now I'm gonna learn how to tread correctly in the water. And this simple shift in a mindset switch seems very small, but once you really make it a habit, it makes such a big difference on your mindset. It makes you so much more positive and so much more it makes you feel so more optimal. You don't feel as negative. So, and this completely changes your whole entire thought of failure, basically. Because your mistakes don't define you. It's usually that your response does. And you know what's crazy that I was thinking about is that we're usually willing to forgive others before we forgive ourselves because of how hard we are on our own selves. Try to have self-forgiveness towards yourself, because remember that there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says I did something bad and shame says I am bad. Those are two different words. And guilt could actually motivate positive changes. And shame basically just paralyzes us, if you really think about it that way. But don't always worry about that, because you could rebuild after those mistakes. And I feel like a lot of people forget about that. And there's different ways for that. You could own it completely, right? And you could say you made a mistake and I'm responsible for that. That's it. It isn't really beating yourself up. It's just about standing in your truth, just kind of taking responsibility for that and moving on from that, not really putting second thoughts or second energy towards that, right? And then maybe you could also make amends where possible. This means a sincere apology towards yourself, or anything else. Or other times it means concrete actions to repair what was broken from before, right? And you think to yourself, maybe, what can I do to make this right, And maybe another thing could be to create a plan towards yourself if you can't really do those two. And what would you, and think of it to yourself specifically, what would you do differently going forward so you don't make that same mistake again? How will you recognize that similar situation? And what kind of habits or boundaries are you going to put for yourself so you don't go towards that mistake again? To try to apply these things, try to think about this, right? What has this mistake what has this mistake taught me, and what can I value from it? And what can I use it to learn, and how can I use that experience to grow? And I like to use I'm going to call it the triple Y's, right? Or not the triple Y's, triple W's. It's called what happened, what I learned, and what can I do differently. Those three things kind of help towards making those mistakes. And, you know, talking to somebody about making those mistakes is really nice as well, you know, because it's kind of like a way to heal if you really think about it, right? And growing up, we're usually told to avoid mistakes at all costs, but I think some of my most profound moments, or like my biggest moments of growth, was when I was at my lowest and when I've had to face parts of myself, and instead of rather ignoring it, because facing those parts really accept things and to help my growth as a person. And second chances don't happen without giving one to yourself, because that's the whole point of the second chance. It's not because of what happened, doesn't matter, but because of who you becomes matters more.